Hello friends, I'm happy to see you on my channel. Today we're going to try replicating minimalist logos from Pinterest using Canva. Designers charge hundreds of euros for these logos and we'll see if we can recreate them in Canva. Today we'll try to recreate 3 logos from Pinterest, not to make an exact copy, but to understand what design techniques were used. I picked very different logos, but I like each one in its own way. Let's start with this agency logo. I just open Canva and create a blank design. Then I add text. I have a check keyboard, so I can type the letter E with an accent right away, which is really convenient for these kinds of logos. Now, the most interesting part is choosing the font. At first glance, it seems like there's some unique designer font here. In reality, very often the whole secret lies in the right proportions, spacing, and small details. First, we try Montserrat to see how close we can get to the original. Next, I increase the letter spacing to make the logo look more airy and premium. Then I add the second part of the composition and write the word U. It needs a handwritten font. I'm searching for Amsterdam. Canva has several variations of this font, so I'm just going through them to see which one is closest to the original. As a result, I stop at the fourth option. It has the most beautiful lines and works best with the main font of the logo. After that, I increase the size, make slight adjustments to its location, and change the color to a muted burgundy shade. Furthermore, it seemed to me that the word agency would look more interesting not in black but in white with a subtle glow. So I save the logo with a transparent background and transfer it to the new layout. Now I add a photo and overlay the logo on top of the image. I immediately see the problem. The word "you" starts to fade a bit into the background of the photo, so I start experimenting. I try out different filters, add a gradient, tweak the opacity, and even test various overlay options. In designs like these, it rarely comes out perfect on the first try. Usually it's at this experimentation stage that the most interesting solutions pop up. I like how the white text looks with a slight glow. It stands out better against a dark background and gives off the vibe of an expensive ad campaign. In the end, I go with an option where the logo stays minimal but doesn't get lost in the photo and immediately catches the eye. It looks quite premium and reminds me of a creative agency or branding studio's ad campaign. I place the logo right over the glasses. Again, I get the feeling it's a logo for some marketing agency. The next logo is called Aurora. At first glance, it looks really simple, but it's these kinds of logos that often end up being the most interesting to recreate. First, I add the name and choose a font that's similar. In my case, Cormorant worked the best. I increase the size and start carefully examining the details. Here I realize the secret of the logo lies entirely in the letter O, which isn't made with a font at all. What I actually find is a separate element in Canva, and I use it to create the whole letter. First, I position the element at the bottom, then I duplicate it and use the top part. After that, I adjust the sizes and align both elements together. This results in a construction of 2 identical elements that together form an unusual letter O. I move them slightly relative to each other to match the shape from the reference. And after that, the logo starts to look almost identical to the one on Pinterest. This is a good example of how designer logos aren't some secret font, but regular elements cleverly put together. For extra text, we pick Montserrat. It pairs perfectly with decorative and accent fonts. I increase the letter spacing, reduce the size, and add a signature. These details are what make the logo look more professional and complete. In the end, we get a stylish, minimalistic logo with a premium feel. Now let's move on to the last logo, Yoga Studio. First, I choose a font that matches the yoga name. But I quickly realized that one font isn't going to cut it here. If you look closely at the reference, you'll see that some elements of the logo were manually refined. This is particularly noticeable on the letter G. So I find a suitable element in Canva and carefully incorporate it into the logo to achieve a similar shape and vibe. Next, I'm adding the Yoga Studio text along the curve with the text warp effect and adjusting the layout. To make it exactly like our reference, we can tweak the letter spacing. But I'm not worrying too much about that and just moving on to the colors. In the original, the text isn't just in one color, it has a smooth gradient, probably thanks to the highlights. So I'm using a gradient to give the text a more three-dimensional and premium look. We weren't able to completely replicate this logo. In the original, some of the elements were likely refined manually, making a perfect match hard to achieve. But in the process, we learned a few useful tricks, revisited how to create curved text, worked with gradients, set up the composition, and got the result as close as possible to the reference. Sometimes repeating these steps isn't just about creating a perfect copy, but about exploring new tools and expanding your design skills. If you found this interesting, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments which logo you like the most.